Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Ethos Online. Again, this is a space where we can be, belong, and become the very best version of ourselves. So, wherever you're joining us today, whether that's California, Florida, Colorado, Michigan, wherever our viewers are, we just want to thank you for being a part of what we do every single week. We think that the Bible is a beautiful, beautiful gift to the world, except we also believe that it takes time. It takes energy, it takes scholarship to really move through this book like it deserves. And so that's what we do here at Ethos. We take time to really delve in really deep. We ask the larger questions of what this book was really intended to mean, and then we can apply it for today. And so, again, welcome back to Ethos. We have been continuing through this series in the book of Genesis. And so we remind everyone Genesis was not a history book. It was never written in order to be like a perfect genealogical perspective on who the Jews were. It was never supposed to be used for scientific understandings of how the world was made. That was never the purpose. We understand the purpose of writing the whole piece in the first place. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. The whole reason it was written is because these Jewish people found themselves in Babylonian captivity in 587 BC. And so 587 BC, they're in the middle of Babylon with all these other tribes of people. And the question was, will they assimilate, take on the traditions, the rituals, the gods of Babylon, or will they hold true to what they believe? And so the majority of tribes during that time, they would have taken on the traits, the characteristics and rituals and gods of Babylon. But Israel says, no, we're not going to assimilate. And one of the safeguards for them was developing Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Torah. And so they compile all of their stories, which were rich with tradition, ritual. It was rich with an understanding of who they were and who they weren't. And so Torah is really a written response to the fears of assimilation. And so every time this piece is brought out on the scrolls, every time they were brought out, there was like rejoicing, because they knew we're about to get a glimpse of who we are and who we aren't. We're about to get a glimpse of our values, about our rituals, our culture. We're about to see all of this in front of us again. And so there would be celebration when it was brought forth, right? The rabbi would sit on the stool, kind of much like I'm doing now, and they would just expand on Torah. And so it was a really rich cultural thing that they would do. They would discuss Torah and all the interpretations of it. And so Torah, we remember them. Torah is Israel miniaturized through all of its tellings. So when you read about Joseph, Moses, Noah, all of these different individuals, understand Israel is seeing themselves in every single story, right? Every single character, every single plot twist, Israel says, oh, right, this is actually about us. Yeah. And so understanding that lens is really important when you begin reading this book responsibly. Once you get that, then you can say, okay, what was the message for Israel, right? And does that message now apply to me? Some messages really do apply. Others, don't sacrifice your children to the god of Marduk. Not really relevant to us today, right? But there are many pieces here that we can pull and say, wow, that's really beautiful. I can live differently, fuller now because of that message. And so we will continue delving into Genesis chapter 27 today. We're going to finish off that chapter. And so last week we talked about how Jacob and Esau, Jacob kind of tricks his father and he gains the birthright. So this time, the rest of this chapter, we're going to hear about Esau's response as he finds out brother has kind of moved in and taken the blessing. So a reminder that we discussed last week, kind of a recap, these two brothers, they're understood in a really interesting way. Again, today, in most Christian churches, they read the story as if these two brothers are very real characters, and it gets kind of weird. Like, why would he do this, and why would mom decide to take the son's side and deceive the father? And it gets a little weird, right? However, when you understand this story from a Jewish perspective, the whole thing hums, right? We understand Jacob. Here's the quote: Jacob, who dwelt in tents, spent his days in the house of study, quiet, thoughtful, settled, orderly, and well integrated. Jacob, not Esau, understood intuitively the dignity of the birthright and the spiritual implications of his father's blessing. He strove to protect the future of Judaism and Jewish life, even if it meant deceiving his father and brother. So we understand Jacob is the more refined one. He's the one that would have studied. The idea of being in a tent meant he studied. He took time to understand kingdom mentality. He understood what it meant to be a Jew, right? He took time with the divine. That's the idea behind Jacob. So conversely, Esau despised the birthright that he should have understood as sacred. Rather, Esau's belly was his God, and his yearning was material. Incapable of deferring hunger, he sacrificed eternity and seated himself with nothing more than a pot of stew. So again, the ancients, these Jewish people who wrote this, the Hebrews, they understood one way of living was to take, eat, miss the sacred and everything, whereas Jacob would have been to see the sacred and everything, to be aware of the divine. And so Esau and Jacob are two very different ways of living in the world. In Israel, oftentimes they find themselves living an Esau or a Jacob kind of existence. And so the call for them was, we need to live a more Jacob life. We need to be aware of the divine everywhere we are. When the opportunity to take the blessing is there, we have to take it, right? We use our gray matter to take the blessing, right? And yes, there's this deception, but again, for the Hebrews, when they read this was not necessarily about good, bad, one deception versus another. The idea was Jacob became aware of the blessing. Esau misunderstood and just gave it away. And that's the deeper point here. Two very different ways of living in the world. The higher self and the lower self. Two different ways of understanding the world. And so this last quote before we delve in, the twins are really the beautiful light and darkness that we Jews embody from day to day. Whichever side we feed is the side that will either waste the blessing of life or multiply it. That's the Jacob and Esau story. So we talked about Jacob last week. So what about Esau? Right? Is there any kind of hope for the Esau's that sometimes miss the blessing? We give it away for things that are just not going to satisfy. What of the Esau's? So here is the rest of the story. What of the Esau's is the question. So I'll read the rest of this chapter and then we'll delve in. It came to pass when Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and it came to pass Jacob had just left his father Isaac's presence. Again, this is how the story goes. Like right after the one, right in comes the other. It's a perfect kind of skit or play, right? This is how they might read it as a Hebrew. Esau came from his hunt, and he too had many tasty foods. And he brought them to his father, and he said to his father, "Let my father arise and eat of the game of his son, so that your soul will bless me." Now remember, Esau's already given away the birthright, right? However, here we are. And his father Isaac said to him, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm your firstborn son, Esau." And Isaac shuddered a great shudder, and he said, "Who then is the one who hunted game and brought it to me? And I ate everything while you had not yet came. And I blessed him. He too shall be blessed." When Esau heard his father's words, he cried out a great and bitter cry, and he said to his father, "Bless me too, O my father." And he said, "Your brother came with cunning and took your blessing." And he said, "It is for this reason that he was named Jacob, for he has deceived me twice. He took my birthright, and behold, now he has taken my blessing." And he said, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" Isaac answered and said to Esau, "Behold, I made him a master over you, and I gave him all his brothers and servants as servants, and I have sustained him with corn and wine, so that then what shall I do, my son? What shall I do?" Right? Esau said to his father, "Have you one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father." And Esau raised his voice and wept. And his father answered him and said, "Behold, your dwelling place shall be the fat places of the earth, and the dew of the heaven from above. And you shall live by the sword, and you shall serve your brother, and it will be when you grieve that you will break his yoke off your neck." And Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing that his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, let the days of mourning for my father draw near. I will then kill my brother Jacob. Things are getting serious, right? Rebekah was told of the words of Esau, her elder son, and she sent and called Jacob to her younger son and said to him, behold, your brother Esau regrets his relationship to you and wishes to kill you. Dun, 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 dun. And now, my son, hearken to my voice and arise, flee to my brother Laban to Haran. And you shall dwell with him for a few days until your brother's wrath has subsided. Until your brother's rage subsides from you and he forgets what you did to him, I will send and bring you from there. Why should I be bereft of both you on one day? Again, interesting story, right? Take a couple days, your brother will forget about it. Really? Right? Again, there's something deeper going on here, right? There's something bigger. So let's delve in. Look at verse 32, right? Look at this, because Jacob just leaves. Esau, exit Jacob, enter Esau, right? It almost plays out like some kind of Shakespearean play. He enters and da-da-da-da, the audience is like, hey, that's weird. He was just there. And this is what happens. Verse 32, Father said, who are you? Who are you? I want you to notice something here. An audience would have been like, wait a second. Of course, in reality, of course he would have recognized his son Esau. If it's his favorite, of course, right? The voice, everything. This is why when we take this thing too seriously, literal, it gets a little wonky. But notice here the verbiage. Who are you? Who are you? It reminds me of some of the words of Jesus, which, again, are echoes of Torah. Matthew 7:21 through 23. I'm going to share with you what I'm getting at here. It says, Jesus is asked about this idea of where's the kingdom of heaven? Where is the promised blessing? Right? Because that's really what the story of Jacob and Esau is. Who gets the promised blessing? Right? Abraham had gotten the promise. Isaac got the promise. Who's going to get the promise now? Now that there's two tribes, right? Now there's two different groups. Who gets the blessing? Who's going to get the blessing? Who's going to be aware of the kingdom of heaven, right? And so this is what the Pharisees are trying to ask Jesus about. And the disciples are saying, who gets to see this? Who gets to be a part of it? Who's there? And this is Jesus' response. And I think it's brilliant. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Again, gain the blessing. But the one who does the will of the Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then will I declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. See, here's the interesting thing here. Again, who gets the blessing? Jesus is very clear about those who get the blessing. It's those who don't waste it, right? The people who get the blessing are the ones who are aware of it. They understand everywhere they go, they carry kingdom of heaven on their backs. The blessing is all around them, right? They're asking, where's the blessing? Not, right? And when they get the blessing, when they get the promise, they don't waste it. The ones who waste it, Jesus says, I never knew you. Who are you, Esau? Who are you? I don't recognize you. Who are you? Another place Jesus says this, and again, I think it's brilliant. On Matthew 24, this idea of when the kingdom of heaven comes, what's it going to look like? Who's going to be deserving of it? This is his response. Again, this is not talking about sometime 2, 3, 4,000 years later, right? This is talking about when do we as Jews get out from under Roman occupation and have our kingdom back? And Jesus' response, again, brilliant. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Again, the end of captivity under Rome. That's the idea. And Jesus answered them, See that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of birth pains. Notice this. It goes to this big list. When is the kingdom of heaven? When do we get to experience the fullness of the presence of the divine, the blessings that were promised? Well, if you're looking for signs, you're going to miss it. Because the reality was, Jesus says, when it happens, you'll know. When it happens, those who have been in their tents, right? Those who have been practicing, understanding the divine, taking time to study the divine, experiencing the divine, when it happens, when the blessing is there, they know to reach out and take it. But the ones who have been asleep, the ones who have been focused on so many other things, they miss the blessing. They waste it. They just give it away, unaware of the gift they're giving. They are unable to observe it. Esau is unable to deserve it. The father does not recognize the son. That would have been a huge moment, right? For any Jew reading this, they would have been like, oh, got it, right? It even reminds me of, in Matthew, there's this brilliant, brilliant parable that Jesus shares. Basically, Matthew 22, there's this king, and he has a wedding feast for his son. He invites all these people, right? And they decide not to show up. And so the king is very frustrated, and none of these honored guests, the ones he has given the blessing of joining him, none of them decide to take it. So he's frustrated, right? None of you cared. None of you came. And so the original guests, he says, the original guests that he gave the blessings to first, the firstborn. You guys getting it so far? Yeah, all of it is connected. The firstborn, they were given the blessing, but they did not choose to accept it. And so what happens? The invitation goes out to the secondborn, right? The ones who are considered unworthy. The blessing goes out and they come to the party. It's really pretty beautiful. It's the story of Jacob and Esau. I find this even interesting. The king went out to look at the guests and saw a man who was not wearing wedding clothes. Friend, how did you get in here without wedding clothes? The king asked. But the man said nothing. Then the king told the servants, tie him up hand and foot, throw him outside in the dark. There he will cry and grind his teeth. And Jesus concluded, many are invited, but few are actually chosen. This idea here, the ones we think are worthiest are sometimes the ones that miss it the most, right? And the whole reason behind the white cloth here, the idea is the invitation's given, right? It showed when you wore that white garment, it showed that you are the guest of the king, right? You're wearing his symbol. Those rewards of the kingdom, the blessing, you have to be willing to give it all up, to cover it up, do what others won't, right? And this is what the story of Jacob is. Jacob does what others won't. That was the idea. And again, I know it sounds very odd, but that was the Jewish understanding of the story, right? When the opportunity to gain the blessing came, Jacob is the one that takes it. Esau does not understand the beauty of the birthright of the blessing. He misses it completely. Let's keep going. In verse 36, I find this part really interesting. He said, it is for this reason that he was named Jacob. Is that why he's named Jacob, right? For he has deceived me twice. He took my birthright, and behold, now he has taken my blessing. And he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? I like this. Is there still a blessing for the Esau's? Is there still a blessing for the people who waste the original blessing in the first place? Is there a blessing for the people who miss it, who just aren't aware, who were sleeping? Is there still a blessing for them? The people who give away their blessing, their birthright for porridge, right? Is there still a place? I want you to notice something Jesus says in chapter 5 of Matthew. He says, the divine makes his sun rise on those who are evil and on those who are good. It makes rain fall on the righteous, those who are morally upright, and the unrighteous. He gives his blessings. The divine gives blessings to everyone. It doesn't matter whether you're good, bad, ugly, whatever. The blessings fall on everyone. Heavy to take, right? For the Esau's, the blessing is still there. Remember the story of the prodigal, right? The son, he takes all the blessings and he wastes it away, while the one son stays, lives with the father, holds on to the blessing, right? And here's the idea here. The son wastes it on this extravagant life that is far from what Jewish values would have held. And yet, when he comes back home with nothing, again, such a beautiful moment. It says the father runs to the son. He says, I love you and everything I have is yours. You have squandered your blessing, but I'm always going to take you back home, right? Such a beautiful message for the prodigals, the Esau's, when you think about it. Because really, that whole story was a response to Jesus basically calling out the Pharisees. He was saying, you keep missing it, right? The prodigals, oftentimes the ones that we've seen that blow it, they still get a blessing, right? And so what a fascinating twist on a story, right? The prodigals, the screw-ups, the ones that miss it, they still get a blessing too. They still have the divine too. They can still partake in kingdom of heaven. Now, for that era, during that time, they're talking about two different regions of Israel, right? Of the Hebrew nation. Yeah. And so you have these two, Judah and Israel, and these two groups. One is more blessed than the other. One's more prosperous than the other. Yet they're both Jewish. They're both brothers. One is going to be the head. The other is going to be the follower. Yeah. And so this is what a Jewish person would have been thinking about when they were reading this. And so the verse continues. We'll continue on. Verse 39. The father answered Isaac, and his father Isaac answered him and said, behold your dwelling place. So here's the blessing. You are still going to be blessed, Esau. You're still going to get a blessing. It's not quite the same though, right? Behold, your dwelling place shall be of the fat places of the earth. There's going to be abundance for you, Esau. You're still going to have abundance. And the dew of the heaven from above. You're still going to be nurtured from above. The divine's still going to take care of you. That's the idea here. You're going to live off the land. You're going to feel good. You're going to have fullness all around you, abundance still. The divine will take care of you. However, you shall live by the sword. You shall serve your brother, and it will be when you grieve that you will break his yoke off your neck. Notice this. This is the story again of Cain and Abel, isn't it? One's going to live off the land, is going to work really hard. The other one's not going to work as hard, right? The other one's going to gain the blessing from the get-go. The younger son versus the older son. It's the same story over and over and over again, right? The one is more deserving. However, both receive the blessing. Both are going to benefit. And so Esau is blessed. Jacob's blessed. The one, though, is going to be following now on the heels of his brother. You see how the tables have turned, right? His blessing is going to be deeply connected now with his brother Jacob's. And that must be very frustrating to him. But when you understand the idea here, when you miss the blessing, when you give it away for porridge, right? When you miss it, the divine will still bless you, but you're going to be following on the coattails of the one who understood it in the first place, because they're going to deeply prosper. And you're going to follow in their footsteps. And this is not an easy thing to do for any of us who are a bit prideful, right? We're taking on those secondhand clothes, aren't we? Yeah, not the easiest thing in the world to do. And so it says in verse 41, it says Esau was mad about his brother. He's mad about the blessing that he's missed, right? That he gave up, that he's going to have to follow after Jacob, who has gained the blessing, who had enough foresight to see this blessing. And so he's going to follow. But notice this. Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing his father had blessed him. And Esau said to him, let the days of mourning of my father draw near, then I will kill my brother Jacob. Rebekah was told the words of Esau, her elder son, and she sent and called Jacob. Her younger son said, "Behold, your brother Esau regrets the relationship to you and wishes to kill you." Esau, however, is still blessed. He's still going to be blessed. However, this is very difficult. The ego gets in the way. But notice there's still the blessing there. There's still a second-hand blessing. It reminds me of this. When we were growing up, my family didn't have much. And so because of that, I always got second-hand clothing from my cousins. Yeah, some of you are like, yes, me too. I lived that. My parents, we just didn't have a ton of money. And so getting new clothes was just it was difficult. It was a luxury. And so I remember my cousins, they would hand me down these clothes. And at first I was so embarrassed to wear them. They're not my clothes. We didn't buy them. And then my cousin Aaron would see me wearing them. It was always a little bit awkward, right? But after a while, I started to understand the blessing of these clothes. I started to understand that, yes, they were Aaron's first, but you know what? They're cool clothes. They're really kind of cool clothes. And I started to enjoy the fact that I had these clothes that Aaron once wore. And now it was my turn to wear them. I got to enjoy them. And that stigma was gone. My pride, I let that go, and I began to realize these are still pretty cool clothes. I really actually like these clothes a lot. And so I got used to the second-hand clothes, the second-hand blessings, you might say. Notice this. Matthew 22, I just read this a few minutes ago. But with that understanding, these second-hand blessings, second-hand clothes, understand the deeper significance here. I'll read it one more time, and I think you'll get it. It's really pretty cool. The king went in to look at the guests and saw a man who was not wearing wedding clothes. Again, this could be an odd story if you didn't get what we just talked about, the second-hand blessing, right? "Friend, how did you get in here without the wedding clothes?" the king asked him. But the man said nothing. Then the king told the servants, "Tie him up hand and foot, throw him outside in the dark. He'll cry out, he'll grind his teeth." And Jesus concluded, "Many are invited, few are chosen." The idea here, this is the whole point of the white garment. I want you to get it. They are the king's second-hand garments. Yeah, interesting twist, right? Interesting connection. They were given to someone else first, weren't they? But the blessings of the banquet, they are still there for them. It's our pride that simply needs to be given away, right? Just put on the garment. Put on the garment. Wear the blessing. I know it may not have been intended for you in the beginning. You might have missed it. But guess what? The blessing's still there. It may not be what you expected. It may be someone's secondhand clothing, but wear the blessing, right? The blessing is there. This person chooses not to put it on at all and miss the blessing entirely again, right? Jesus says, many are invited, but few are chosen. Many will come to the wedding, but few actually understand the real blessing. But it is offered to everyone. And the story ends, again, "Now, my son, hearken my voice. Arise, flee to your brother Laban." And Jacob leaves until your brother's rage subsides from you and he forgets what you did to him. I'll send you forth later on. And so the story ends with Jacob running because it's going to take Esau some time. It's going to take Esau some time to understand the second-hand blessing is still deep. It's a powerful blessing. It's going to take him, however, a long time to get the connection. It's going to take him time to understand the kingdom come message, right? It's going to take some time for his pride and his ego to subside. It's going to take him time. One of my favorite rabbis says this about the story. Israel, much like Esau, will at times learn to accept the second-hand blessings of kingdoms they are captive to. Now it comes together, right? They must learn to thrive and find peace with their enemies' blessings until the divine brings theirs to fruition. They are in the middle of Babylonian captivity. They are watching as other nations are thriving. And the divine in this moment is saying, look, the blessing's coming. The blessing's coming. Sometimes we have to wear secondhand clothing for a while. But the blessing's there. It's there for us right here, right now. Just wait on it. Study, take time, become the Jacob. When the time comes and the blessing is there within our reach, we grab it. We don't miss it again like the Esau's. But if we do, guess what? Even in captivity, we can still wear our second-hand clothing. We can still wear the white garment that was given to one and they missed it, and we can take it on for ourselves. It's a beautiful, beautiful story for Israel. Wasn't that fun? Yeah, so many interesting concepts when you really delve in to who this was originally written to and what the rabbis of that time actually thought about it. It's so good, so rich. So I started thinking, what could I do with this today? How could I take it home? When I read now about Esau, I begin to see kind of a pride there. Esau is very prideful. He doesn't want to wear the secondhand clothing, does he? He wants the original blessing, but he didn't take time to understand it, so he missed it. And so I started thinking, what do I do with my pride and ego? How do I overcome it? So I took some time to really delve into some biblical ideas as well as some philosophical ones. And so I thought about, how do we become less prideful? How do we fight back the ego? So number one, I would argue we have to learn to be aware. The first step is checking your pride. It's recognizing when you might be a little too prideful over whatever it is. And so be introspective, but not too hard on yourself, right? Once you start listening to your thoughts, you are thinking about others, exercise those ideas, you begin to have more control over your pride. So just become aware that, oh man, I think I'm being a bit prideful in this moment. I think I'm so angry right now. I think that my response is going to be this because my ego is in the way right now. Just being aware of it is the first step. Number two, don't take yourself too seriously. I think we do this way too much. We are so focused on looking a certain way and acting a certain way, portraying ourselves in a certain way. We take ourselves way too seriously. And so Psychology Today, interesting article, explained that what pride comes from is a fear, a very deep fear of embarrassing ourselves or shaming ourselves. And so if you're willing to laugh at yourself, kind of admit that you don't know everything, I think that's a big step in dropping that pride and that ego. You can admit, hey, I made a mistake. I'm human. I'm human and so are you, right? We can step away from the pride and the ego. We can begin living a little more free if we can learn not to take ourselves too seriously. Number three, ask the right question, right? This idea, the open door to resolution, growth, whatever, what happened, right? What do I want? Instead of why am I feeling such a failure, those kind of things, we just start asking better questions of the issue. Is there something bigger going on? Is this really that important? Is this a hill that's really that important that I'm going to die on it? Right? Asking yourself those questions will ultimately help us move away from prideful decisions, letting ego dominate conversation. Number four, be open-minded. Be open-minded. Your way doesn't have to be the highway, right? Learn to just have an open mind. Ask questions. Try to seek a deeper understanding. If you feel yourself shutting someone down before they even finish a sentence, maybe take a breath. Take a breather for a second. Be open-minded to hear different perspectives. And so with that, listen. Listen. Once the mind is open, take time to listen. Don't talk, right? Listening is like the antithesis to pride. And so when we're able to just stop and say, I want to listen to you. I want to take time to not just talk, but listen to your perspective. Because when I do, I think that's when pride is totally shattered. I won't talk at you from ego. I'll talk to you as a friend now because the discussion has opened up a conversation. Those are 5 different ways I think that I'm going to begin practicing this week again, just focusing on learning how to drop the ego and the pride and living a little more balanced. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this. Please go to ethos-church.org/donate. We're getting to the point where we're moving toward tax season again. We are a tax-deductible donation organization, and we accept donations. And so please consider walking with us in these deep studies. Help us continue promoting what we do. We'd love to have you join us live, Ethos Living Rooms. Please consider that. And as always, hit that subscribe button, share these views. This year, we really want to keep working on building the YouTube channel as well as our others, but this one especially. So everyone, thank you so much for taking time, spending with us today, delving into such a rich, beautiful book. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and we'll see you next week.